interested in entering into a negotiation which would lead to a disclosure of what they were. Of course, I spent a good deal of time looking through these papers, trying to find out what the nature of this secret weapon was. I think I had, although I don't remember it so very accurately, an idea of what its properties were. It had the capability of acting at a great distance, of being destructive to flying objects and things of that kind at a place which was remote from the source. But nowhere in his technical papers did I find anything which revealed an explanation of just how such a device could operate.
I believe that you also opened another box, supposedly a secret weapon that he left at another hotel. Can you relate that story, please?
Yes, when I had substantially concluded my study on the following day, I think that was a Saturday morning, I was reminded by one of the two agents that there was a box being held as a security for an unpaid obligation, and that this box was an item of considerable value and may indeed itself be the secret weapon, that it was armed and therefore it probably was not touched.
Were you nervous doing this?
I found it a matter of a bit of concern. However, I realized that this had to be done, and so we taxied down to this hotel. The agents identified themselves and their credentials to the assistant manager of the hotel, who led us to a room. This room was essentially empty except for a table and a steel cabinet against the wall, which was opened. I think perhaps he opened it with a key. The cabinet itself was empty, except on one of the lower shelves was a package, a box, a rectangular box of ordinary size, which was wrapped in brown wrapping paper. It turned out to be a highly polished box with brass clasps, and it looked more like an instrument case. And after waiting a while and listening a while and remembering that it had been there for quite a few years, I think it had actually been there for about 5 years as a security, I opened it. My report to Dr. Compton was that I saw no danger in releasing these papers and these relics to his heirs.
Miss Musar had arrived too late to know who had opened Dr. Tesla's safe or what had been removed. And Dr. Trump had found nothing which he considered dangerous or a secret weapon. Tesla had been a naturalized American citizen for 54 years, so why were his papers seized by agents of the custodian of alien property? I suspect that governments other than those of the United States, England, and Russia were interested in the inventions of Dr. Tesla.
Keep happiness blooming after the holidays with fresh flower subscriptions from the Books Company. Learn more at Books.com.
Indeed, governments other than the United States, England, and Russia were interested, as this was 1943, at the height of World War II, and the most technologically advanced nation in the world at the time was Germany. While it's a fact that Germany did not win the war, it's also a fact that military expeditions continued immediately following the official end of the war, such as Operation High Jump, which was a literal invasion of what was an allegedly German military base in Antarctica that was rumored to house Germany's most advanced technology, as well as the last battalion of the SS, which never surrendered in 1945. While there are those that question the speculation regarding Operation High Jump, they are often the same people that question the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, where disc-shaped craft hovered above the west coast of the United States for hours, or the alleged disc-shaped craft that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, or the disc-shaped craft that, according to national press, outran jets and flew over the White House with impunity in 1952.
Well, actually what this booklet does, it discusses a great many of these sightings around Washington, D.C., particularly those of mid-June when about a dozen of the things came over. About a dozen of them came over one night. They were tracked by radar. They were seen visually. They followed the planes in, and according to the CAA's own booklet, the pilots got good looks at the things as they followed them in and out of the airport. Some of them hovered. Some of them went around the Capitol building. Some went over the monument and the White House and over the deep freeze and circled all around there. They were seen plainly. There was no question about them being there. And as a matter of fact, the officials were so concerned about it that on the following morning they issued a shoot 'em down order. Why didn't they shoot 'em down the first night? They didn't shoot 'em down because the jets couldn't catch them, and they've never been able to catch one yet. The jets couldn't catch them. The next night they showed up. The jets didn't go up after them. They didn't go up with their shoot 'em down order for the simple reason that Albert Einstein and others of comparable standing heard about the shoot 'em down order because the story was on the front pages all over the world. They heard about this shoot 'em down order, and they personally got in touch with the little man in the White House, and I know what Mr. Einstein told him. He said, "Mr. President, anyone who can cross millions of miles of space will be able to take care of himself after he gets there. Don't start something you can't finish." That was one time that Give 'em Hell Harry decided it would be better not to give him any hell.
The official word from the US government regarding flying saucers at the time was either that they were weather balloons or aliens from another planet. The idea being that they could control both sides of the story, whether people believed that they were real or fake, as long as they did not suspect that they originated on Earth, especially by German nationalists that they could not defeat, whose technology would make the Rockefeller energy sector monopoly obsolete. While these craft posed a national security threat, the threat of free energy was arguably of greater concern, as it directly challenged big oil and their stranglehold on the world economy. I've covered what happens next in several prior videos, especially on my other channel, including the following clip that I'd like to include in this presentation, which explores an alternative mathematics, which Tesla himself was aware of and could hold keys to freeing mankind from those that would prefer to enslave it. A vortex is most commonly defined as a mass of whirling fluid or air, especially a whirlpool or whirlwind, in which the flow rotates around an axis line. So it's a mass of something that spins around and pulls objects down into its center, or when the spin around the center draws the outside in. That's a vortex. And math is often defined as the science of numbers, quantities, and shapes, and the relations between them. So vortex-based mathematics can be understood as a new way of understanding numbers, not just as mere quantities, but where each has its own unique quality, archetype, and behavior. While several mainstream sources have denounced this idea, calling it New Age pseudomath, the truth is that this alternative form of mathematics is not new at all, and actually is quite ancient, with similar concepts having been found etched on Babylonian clay tablets dating back several millennia. This non-linear, holistic view of math was also revered by none other than Nikola Tesla, who famously stated that, quote, "If you knew the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9, you would have a key to the universe," end quote. Tesla believed that numbers had extreme importance, and so did the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who around 500 BC was famously quoted as saying, "All is number." The basic principle of vortex math is that all numbers can be reduced down to single digits, from 1 to 9, And this form of reduction is common in many forms of occult practices, commonly referred to as numerology, which is any belief in the divine or mystical relationship between a number and one or more coinciding events. It's also the study of the numerical value of letters in words, names, and ideas, and often associated with astrology or Kabbalah, where letters are assigned a numeric value. That said, the process of reducing a number down to one digit between 1 and 9 is also common practice not only in numerology, but also in mainstream science, such as with computer programming. So, for example, a number such as 12 would be reduced to 3 by adding 1 plus 2. The number 10 would be reduced to 1 by adding 1 plus 0. The number 99, for example, would be reduced by adding 9 plus 9, making 18, and further reduced by adding 1 plus 8, giving us 9. Understanding this principle, let us now apply this number 1 through 9 to a circle, a concept that was made famous in modern times by a gentleman named Marco Rodin, but which, as I said earlier, is actually very ancient. Notice the lines in the center, which resemble the Volkswagen logo, and the special relationship between 3, 6, and 9, which we will get into later. Let us start with the number 1. When we double the number 1, we get the number 2, which is connected here with a line. When we double the number 2, we get the number 4. When we double the number 4, we get the number 8. Doubling the number 8 gives us 16. And since 16 is a double digit, we reduce it by adding 1 and 6, giving us the number 7, which, as you can see, is connected to the number 8 by a line. Doubling 16, we get the number 32. And after reducing 32 by adding the 3 and the 2, we get 5, which is the next number connected to the 7. When we double 32, we get 64. We then reduce that by adding the 6 and the 4, which gives us 10. So we reduce that by adding the 1 and the 0, leaving us with 1. And we're back where we started. So there's a parallel between 64 and 1 when it becomes whole again, or a single unit. This is why 64 is the complete cycle for the Mayan calendar or the I Ching. Also, there are 64 possible patterns for a codon in DNA. This doubling, or geometric progression, is commonly found in nature and was understood by the ancients. Now, if we go backwards, meaning reduce the number 1 by half, we would get 0.5, which translates to 5. If we reduce 0.5 in half, we get 0.25. And after adding the 2 and 5, it leaves us with 7. Reducing 0.25 in half gives us 0.125. And adding 1 plus 2 plus 5 gives us 8. Reducing 0.125 in half gives us 0.0625. And adding 0 plus 6 plus 2 plus 5 leaves us with 13. And adding 1 and 3 gives us the number 4. Half of 0.0625 is 0.03125. And adding 0 plus 3 plus 1 plus 2 plus 5 gives us 11. Reducing 11 by adding 1 plus 1 leaves us with the number 2. And finally, half of 0.03125 is 0.015625. And 0 plus 1 plus 5 plus 6 plus 2 plus 5 equals 19. 1 plus 9 equals 10, and 1 plus 0 gets us right back to 1 and where we started. This cycle of doubling each number or reducing each number by half works with any variation of the number you start with. So for example, if you start with 100 instead of 1 and reduce it in half or double it and follow the procedure we just did, you will find it works out perfectly. You may have also noticed that the pattern skipped the numbers 3, 6, and 9, the numbers that Nikola Tesla said were the key to the universe. When the number 3 is doubled, we get the number 6. When 6 is doubled, we get 12, and 1 plus 2 is 3. 12 doubled becomes 24, and 2 plus 4 is 6. 24 doubled is 48, and 4 plus 8 is 12, with 1 plus 2 bringing us back to 3. 48 doubled is 96, and 9 plus 6 is 15, with 1 plus 5 giving us 6. So no matter how often you double the 3 and the 6, or half them, you will find the oscillating back and forth between each other. Half of 6 is 3, half of 3 is 1.5, and 1 plus 5 is 6. Any variation will work. Half of 30 is 15, and again, 1 plus 5 gives us 6. So there's a very special relationship between 3 and 6, a back and forth cycle which none of the other numbers share. This finally brings us to the number 9, which is also sacred in Taoism, and we will now see why. What happens when we double the number 9? 9 becomes 18, and 1 plus 8 is 9. 18 doubled is 36, and 3 plus 6 is 9. 36 doubled is 72, and 7 plus 2 is 9. This goes on indefinitely. What happens when we half 9? Half of 9 is 4.5, and 4 plus 5 equals 9. Half of 4.5 is 2.25, and 2 plus 2 plus 5 is 9. So 9 is very unique, and while all the numbers are special in their own respect, 9 is the only one with this property, and why it is the center, forming the axis in the middle. This is further illustrated when we look at each set of numbers on each side of the circle equaling 9. 8 plus 1 is 9. 7 plus 2 is 9. 6 plus 3 is 9. And 5 plus 4 is 9. So 9 is in the middle. It separates and polarizes the numbers, turning the other numbers into a sort of mirror image, or right and left, or a positive and negative. Two sides of a coin, so to speak, two halves of a whole. Now when we take away the trinity of 3, 6, and 9, we are left with 6 numbers, the 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, and 5. And esoterically speaking, these 6 make up the physical world of creation, the pattern that is repeated in physicality, the underlying geometry of the material world, which is essentially hexagonal, and this can be seen in nature. Such as in the formation of crystals or in snowflakes. 3, 6, and 9 seem to transcend the physical and are therefore considered part of the higher world, which give them special applications in terms of physics and even religion or spirituality. The Rodin coil is a three-dimensional toroidal shape with this vortex math attached to it, where alternating current is run through a loop, creating a very strong magnetic field inside of the coil. When magnetic objects are placed in the center of the coil, the magnetic field created by the coil causes the magnets to rotate and even levitate. There are many claims made about this simple geometric shape, essentially made from copper wire, coiled in a specific way, such as being able to produce free energy or at least greatly amplifying energy, there are also many skeptics. That said, Tesla's work also had many skeptics, most of it buried under government classification, but that doesn't mean it wasn't valid or useful. Scientists now accept that a material universe as the foundation of what we perceive to be our physical material world isn't quite the case. Today, physicists recognize that physical atoms are actually made up of vortices of energy that are constantly spinning and vibrating. At its smallest observable level, matter is energy, and this energy that exists all around us can be tapped into and potentially used to generate power. Quantum physics has left many scientists baffled. If quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Everything we call real is made up of things that cannot be regarded as real. Spiritual concepts of our ancient world are directly intertwined with modern-day science, and especially quantum physics, and Nikola Tesla was well aware of this. All perceptible matter comes from a primary substance, or tenuity beyond conception, filling all space, the akasha or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana, or creative force, calling into existence in never-ending cycles all things and phenomena. As you can see, Tesla was aware of ancient concepts and correlations it had with the science he was working on, using Sanskrit words like akasha and prana to describe the force and matter that exists all around us. These words come from ancient Aryan or Vedic texts. Another term for prana is chi in the Far East, or ether in certain occult or alchemical circles, and vril in esoteric European secret societies. This subtle bioelectromagnetic life force energy was said to be available throughout the universe and could allegedly be harnessed and redirected into a free energy technology. Before many generations pass, our machinery will be driven by a power obtainable at any point in the universe. This idea is not novel. We find it in the delightful myth of Antheus, who derives power from the earth. We find it among subtle speculations of one of your splendid mathematicians. Throughout space, there is energy. Is this energy static or kinetic? If static, our hopes are in vain. If kinetic, and this we know it is, for certain, then it is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature. My name is Robert Sepper. I'm an anthropologist. My published work is available on Amazon, as well as through various other major book outlets. They make a great gift. If you'd like to support my work, you can do that through patreon.com. There should be a link in the description section for those that are interested. I appreciate it. Thank you. Please hit the like button and subscribe for future updates. As always, I look forward to reading your comments, so please leave me your thoughts below. Please have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.
There we go. That's perfect.
Wow, that's incredible.
Using Zelle to send money to friends and family pretty much wherever they bank is incredible.
Isn't that right, Kevin?
Zelle. Look for it in your banking app.
Extreme conditions. The United States was unprepared for the war, sent troops to Korea in the dead of winter, dressed in summer tropical uniforms, and the front lurched repeatedly north and south. In the first year of the war, many American troops were captured. There were high death rates amongst the POWs, and many collaborated with the enemy by broadcasting anti-war messages. When the armistice was finalized, all prisoners were given a choice of where they wanted to be relocated. We crowed when thousands of Chinese and North Koreans repudiated going home and preferred to settle in the West. We were absolutely flummoxed when about 20 American POWs refused to come home, preferring instead to settle in China or Russia. How had this happened? What happened to them in the prison camps? A retired OSS propaganda agent, Edward Hunter, invented a new term for this behavior, brainwashing. He wrote, "In brainwashing, a fog settles over the patient's mind until he loses touch with reality. Brainwashing is something new, which is contrary to human nature and inseparable from communism." He didn't exactly invent the new word. Rather, he took a complex Chinese term, xinao, and repurposed it in a lurid term of brainwashing. US military experts hated his terminology, found it flamboyant and misleading. Instead, they preferred coercive persuasion, a much more accurate term. But brainwashing to this day is the favored terminology in popular culture. If you do a Google search on brainwashing, you discover over 34 million web pages on this topic. Compare that to coercive persuasion with its 48,000 web pages. The Chinese treated prisoners with a mixture of brutality and kindness. There was an unusual methodical quality to their efforts. They subjected POWs to ceaseless propaganda, forced them to write long confessions, and placed them in groups where they denounced each other. Not only did they get POWs to confess to war crimes and make anti-war propaganda broadcasts, but the Chinese seemed to get better results over time. In the course of just a year and a half, the percent of POWs caving into pressure increased from 25% to 75%. POWs who started collaborating with the enemy were treated better, and at the time of the armistice, some declined to return home. America viewed this with consternation. On the one hand, there was fear that the Chinese had deployed some secret weapon invented by Pavlov. On the other hand, our troops were viewed as cowards for caving in. There was no understanding of what they had been through. This Herb Block cartoon captures the mood at home. Two executives sit in their private club discussing world events while drinking and smoking cigars. One says to the other that he would never have caved in. Instead, he would have said to the Reds, "Now see here." People lost sight of the fact that the POWs were treated with extraordinary brutality. Indeed, the POW death rates in Korea exceeded those found in Japan or Vietnam. Two critics of the Korean War were particularly harsh in their judgment of our soldiers, Major William Mayer and journalist Eugene Kincaid. To their mind, the GIs had no gumption, were victims of momism. The fault was that liberals had sapped our strength so much that there was no discipline. It was our fault that 38% of the prisoners callously allowed themselves to die. Other voices were not so sure about that judgment. They pointed to the prisoners' debility due to starvation and exposure to severe cold, their total dependency on their captors, and the constant dread of execution. In the light of the Korean War experience, President Eisenhower was advised to start a brain war offensive that would bring together the CIA and academic researchers. Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, felt that there was a contest with Russia to develop new techniques of brainwashing. The Russians take selected human beings whom they wish to destroy and turn them into humble confessors of crimes they never committed. New techniques wash the brain clean of the thoughts. Indirect CIA funding flowed to university researchers through foundations and research institutes. Harold Wolff and Larry Hinkle at Cornell received funds and channeled money through the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. This MK Ultra funding supported scores of university laboratories across the country. Wolff at that time was America's leading neurologist, and Hinkle was a brilliant internist who studied stress and heart disease. Hinkle worked closely with the CIA on various projects that raised profound ethical considerations. Here we see how Wolff answered a delicate question posed by CIA agent White, who asks, what is the possibility of working out a graph indicating the state of panic of the enemy based upon the varying degree of pressure used? Wolff replied smoothly, yours is a very provocative notion, and I'm sure it could be documented. Warm regards. A shocking response from the tacit head of American neurology at the time. Wolff's proposal to CIA started out pretty ominously. Potentially useful secret drugs and various brain-damaging procedures will be tested in order to ascertain their fundamental effect upon brain function. As these drugs are investigated, a concurrent search for antidotes or countermeasures will be conducted. Then the proposal veered into an even more shocking direction. Where any of these studies involve potential harm to the subject, we expect the agency to make available suitable subjects and a proper place for the performance of necessary experiments. In other words, he wanted the agency to furnish the victims and then dispose of them. MKUltra devoted enormous efforts at studying LSD, determining its dose, if there was habituation with continued use, if there was an antidote, or could it be used to immobilize an enemy? The studies frequently involved unwitting individuals surreptitiously dosed, and there were casualties. Perhaps the most notorious experiment involved Frank Olson, a government scientist who was surreptitiously dosed with LSD dropped into his Cointreau. In response, he became severely depressed and agitated. This family photo shows him as a father in happier times. The CIA took him to see Dr. Abramson, an LSD expert who had ties with the Institute. Rather than immediately hospitalize this VIP patient, Abramson sent him back to the Statler Hotel with 2 CIA minders. Olson died that night after falling out of his hotel window. It's not clear if it was an accident, if he jumped, or if he was pushed. The family was not told about the secret LSD dosing for decades. Perhaps some of you are familiar with Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne books and movies. Recall the plot. A young soldier played by Matt Damon goes to see an avuncular psychiatrist who agrees to radically restructure the young man's life. The doctor destroys the man's memories and trains him to become a consummate assassin. It's a compelling story, and one that is partially based on one of the most notorious CIA-sponsored brainwashing studies. It's all true. Memory obliteration with LSD and electroconvulsive treatments, and memory restructuring during sleep. The assassin training was not part of the CIA endeavors in actuality. The work was done in Montreal. Psychiatrist Ewan Cameron headed up the Allen Institute of Psychiatry. Dr. Cameron believed that psychotherapy could be speeded up if you simply obliterated old memories and started anew. He repeatedly played tapes to patients about how they should think and feel. He obliterated memory with massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy, as well as cocktails of LSD and other drugs. After weeks of this, he played tape loops up to 250,000 times while his patients slept. He succeeded in destroying memories, but could not show that his patients learned from tape repetitions. The lawsuits are still being adjudicated. From roughly 1915 to 1965, governments and universities tried to develop tools for brainwashing. They weren't exactly successful. Torture didn't persuade people to adopt different political beliefs, nor did it elicit information reliably. Any number of drugs could sedate, stimulate, or confuse people, but they weren't effective in interrogations or persuasion. Group pressures, sensory isolation, sleep deprivation were promising tools for coercive persuasion, but these required time and finesse. In the 1970s and 1980s, two unlikely players emerged demonstrating new techniques in dark persuasion: kidnappers and clerics. On August 23, 1973, Jan Erik Olsson robbed the Kreditbanken Bank in Stockholm. He took the bank staff hostage and held them in the vault while negotiating with the police. Over the ensuing days, the hostages started collaborating with their captor, developed fondness for him, and began to distrust the police. He didn't torture, shoot, or rape the hostages. He was solicitous of them and caressed them. As one hostage put it, when he treated us well, we could think of him as God. When the police eventually liberated the hostages, they hugged the bank robber and shook hands in farewell, calling out, "I'll see you again." This wasn't just some Scandinavian liberal aberration. Similar events have been seen off and on all over the world, sometimes involving terrorists, sometimes kidnappings for money or sexual exploitation. These situations have become known as habas, or hostage and barricade situations. We have data on a dishearteningly large number of such situations. To a certain extent, the hostage is correct to distrust the police. In a kidnapping situation, he or she is more likely to be shot by the police than by the kidnappers. Ultimately, 50% of hostages form some kind of positive bond with their captor. The extent of the full-blown Stockholm Syndrome is unclear. Considerable work from all over the world has attempted to divine what kind of hostage situation or what kind of victim is more likely to be associated with these paradoxical fondnesses for the hostage taker. Stockholm-like phenomenon appear during longer-term captivity, and children appear to be singularly vulnerable. The Patricia Hearst kidnapping could be considered a variant of Stockholm, another bank robbery half a world away and half a year after the Stockholm robbery. Her autobiography describes very well her life prior to the kidnapping and since. I grew up in an atmosphere of clear blue skies, bright sunshine, rambling open spaces, long green lawns, country clubs with swimming pool, and I took it all for granted. I live now in a private protected street, in a house equipped with the best electronic security system available. I do not live in fear. It's just that I feel older and wiser now. I am aware of the stark reality that I am vulnerable, that there are forces out there which are ever threatening. She had the misfortune to come to the attention of Donald DeFreeze. I'll let you read for yourselves his manifesto. DeFreeze was a violent criminal who nicknamed himself General Field Marshal Cinque Matumo, and he headed a small group called the Symbionese Liberation Army. Most of his rantings ended in the trademark "death to the fascist insect who preys upon the people." Miss Hearst was a Berkeley undergrad when she was violently abducted from her apartment. She was seized and hurled in the trunk of a car and then shoved in a closet while the SLA tried to extract a ransom. Her family agreed to distribute food to the poor, and there were riots as the food was being distributed. Within weeks of being abducted, Patricia changed her name to Tanya and joined the group as a revolutionary, ultimately robbing a bank with them. It's important to look at the compressed timeline of events. 10 weeks after kidnapping, she robs the Hibernia Bank. 3.5 months after the kidnapping, she engaged in a shootout at Mills Sporting Goods store. When she was eventually captured, she asserted that she had become a revolutionary. At trial, the defense claimed that she had been forced to do these things against her will. People wondered, how was she forced? Did it relate to her violent kidnapping and sensory isolation in the closet? The trial essentially focused on psychiatric expert witness testimony. On the defense side, psychologist Margaret Singer observed that her speaking and writing style had changed during her captivity, that her IQ had dropped due to extreme stress, and that she wasn't herself while being held by the SLA. Charlie West said that Hearst manifested chronic classic signs of coercive persuasion, that she was debilitated, had total dependency on her captors, and was living in constant dread. Martin Orne said that she was telling the truth as she saw it, that she had dissociated during her time with the SLA or unconsciously split off those memories and actions. Robert Lifton recalled his experience with victims of Chinese thought reform and pointed out that she caved in under guilt, group pressure, and terror. The prosecution psychiatrists attacked this testimony. Joel Fort denied there was any such thing as brainwashing and stated that Hearst had merely converted her beliefs and joined the SLA robberies voluntarily for excitement. Harry Kozel described her as a frustrated, angry, confused girl who was ripe for the plucking, in a rebel in search of a cause. So the jury had to struggle with two questions. Was she guilty? That is, was it coercion or was it her own choice? Secondly, did they want to consider the circumstances of her kidnapping as a mitigating factor? The jury found her guilty, and the judge gave her no slack whatsoever. Her sentence was the typical first offense sentence for armed bank robbery. However, subsequently, she received presidential clemency and pardon. I've touched on how coercive persuasion evolved in the hands of government, and government agencies, academia, and criminals. I'd like to finish by discussing how religious cults have used coercive persuasion. Heaven's Gate began in Houston and was led by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, who renamed themselves Bo or Doe and T or D. They were convinced that they literally belonged with the stars and that they were trapped on Earth in bodies that were actually archaic vessels from space. They started wandering and proselytizing about UFOs and redemption. They formed a group called Heaven's Gate and preached a life of asceticism. Get your vehicle under control was their motto. They preached eating pure food and avoiding sexuality, which they felt corroded their vessels. Some even had themselves castrated to stop sexual temptation. They emphasized conformity and renamed themselves with peculiar names. They discouraged contacts with family and friends. They had very precise rules to help them find their way in the world. Major offenses were things like deceit or sensuality. Lesser offenses including having private thoughts or being curious. Over the years, the membership dwindled and the feel of the group darkened. And by that time, they were living in a mansion here in Rancho Santa Fe. We might never have heard of them, and they might never have killed themselves, except for the bad luck of the Hale-Bopp comet. In 1996 and 1997, this was the brightest and longest lasting comet in known history. It came upon us as a surprise, and Bo was convinced that trailing the comet was a spaceship coming to take them home to the stars. He persuaded the group that if they killed themselves during the comet's closest pass to Earth, they would teleport finally to the stars and immortality. The group vowed to kill themselves, but videotaped farewells in advance. Sitting tranquilly in the grounds of their mansion, they talked about their joy in anticipating the next step. Some tried to head off criticism, anticipating that the press would paint them as disturbed. In their words, "This is my family. Laying down this vehicle is going to be great. I'm shedding it like a husk." Others stared into the camera and said, "I'm the happiest person on the world to be doing this," or "I have such joy and wonder at the thought of going home." Over the course of one day, they killed themselves in 3 waves. All were dressed identically. They ingested vodka, mixed barbiturates into their pudding, and put plastic bags over their heads. Then they were all gone. When the bodies were discovered and autopsied, pathologists were astonished to find that many of the men had been castrated. I've focused on brainwashing in the 20th century. While it was tempting to talk about current events and controversies, I think we need more distance in time to have a dispassionate perspective. However, I do have some thoughts on things that might develop in the future. The first challenge will be neuroscience. We were able to do some surprising things in the 1960s. Robert Heath pioneered in deep brain stimulation, studying how implanted electrodes could modify complex behavior in people. The CIA asked that he work with them on pleasure and pain circuits, but he spurned them, saying, "I'm a doctor, not a spy." We can do much more today with safer and more precise surgery. We are restrained by a sense of professional ethics by focusing on clinical conditions. Would that restraint be evident in times of war? I think the bigger challenge will come from social media. Social media offers so much promise, but there is a dark side. We need to ask ourselves if social media can be weaponized as a tool for coercive persuasion. If social media is associated with bullying, coercion, surreptitious monitoring, and restricted information, one has to wonder if it is a tool for coercive persuasion. In this sense, social media is just another social intoxicant. And as we know so well from the example of drinking and driving, it takes many decades for cultures to develop expectations for how one interacts with new social intoxicants. George Orwell soberly observed, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. From my point of view, if we ignore the potential of brainwashing and the developments in the 21st century, then we are defenseless, and Orwell will have been right. But I do believe we have a choice. We need to look back and consider